You said you were bringing a modern edge to it on stage. What do you mean by that?
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
Hollywood has just thrown a major curveball. In an unexpected twist, YouTuber Brett Cooper is set to face off with Rachel Zegler in a highly anticipated role for the Snow White remake.
You didn't start these fairy tales. Grimm's fairy tales, that's where they came from. People love these for a reason because of the values. You don't need to make this girl bossy to make it relevant for young women.
But what sparked this surprising move to create not one, but two Snow White reboots?
I feel like this Snow White controversy is single-handedly like rolling back feminism. Like all these women are watching Rachel Zegler on their phones, on their social media. They're hating her because she's absolutely destroying this role.
And could the brewing clash between Rachel and Brett be just the start of a much larger unfolding drama? Clash beyond entertainment. In 2025, two very different versions of Snow White are set to hit the big screen, and with them a cultural clash that goes beyond just entertainment. Disney's live-action remake, starring Rachel Zegler as the iconic princess, promises to be a modern, inclusive retelling, a fresh take on a classic tale with a focus on diversity. On the other hand, conservative media company The Daily Wire is offering its own version of the story, with rising star Brett Cooper in the lead role, emphasizing a return to more traditional storytelling values. This isn't just a battle for box office dominance. The controversy surrounding Disney's casting decisions and The Daily Wire's approach taps into broader conversations about representation, the preservation of cultural narratives, and the changing landscape of storytelling. Disney's Snow White, which has already drawn criticism for its casting choices, represents a shift toward more inclusive and progressive portrayals of fairy tale characters. Meanwhile, The Daily Wire's adaptation is positioning itself as a nostalgic alternative, one that critiques the trend of modernizing classic stories to fit current social and political sensibilities. At its core, this debate is about more than just which version will be the more popular film. It raises important questions about how we tell stories, who gets to tell them, and what values we choose to emphasize. In an age where cultural divides are becoming more pronounced, the two Snow White films reflect competing visions of the world, each one trying to capture the heart of what it means to be timeless in a rapidly changing society. Is it fair to alter a character's cultural background for the sake of inclusivity? Snow White fairy tale has transcended its origins in German folklore to become a fixture of global pop culture. From its debut as a 1973 animated film by Walt Disney to the numerous adaptations in literature, film, and television, the character of Snow White has always been a symbol of innocence, beauty, and in some versions, a passive damsel in distress. However, as societal views on gender, race, and identity have evolved, so too have interpretations of the tale. The decisions made in the upcoming 2025 live-action remakes, particularly with regard to casting, character development, and the story's thematic focus, reflect the broader cultural shifts within Hollywood and society at large. But with these changes, questions arise. Is this reimagining of Snow White necessary, or is it an unnecessary break from tradition? Disney's 2025 remake, directed by Mark Webb and starring Rachel Zegler as Snow White, is one of the studio's many live-action reboots of animated classics. Disney has framed this version as a progressive take, seeking to modernize the story for a new generation. At the center of the reimagining is Zegler, a Colombian-American actress whose casting in the role of the princess has already stirred debate. For some, Zegler's casting is seen as a positive move toward greater inclusivity, breaking away from the traditional European fair-skinned depiction of Snow White. However, for others, this change is viewed as an attempt to erase the original cultural context of the fairy tale. But does the ethnicity of the character matter? And is this an example of necessary cultural sensitivity or politically correct tokenism? Meanwhile, The Daily Wire's adaptation, Snow White and the Evil Queen, starring Brett Cooper, aims to return to the traditional fairy tale's roots. This version is being marketed as a more faithful retelling of the classic, focusing on Snow White's innocence, beauty, and need for rescue rather than any modern feminist reinterpretations. The Daily Wire's film is a direct counterpoint to Disney's progressive agenda, emphasizing traditional values in the portrayal of Snow White and the Evil Queen. Does embracing tradition mean we must reject contemporary ideas of empowerment and representation, or is there room for both to coexist in different versions of the same story? Disney's progressive reimagination. Disney's live-action remake of Snow White is symbolic of the studio's recent trend of reimagining its animated classics for a contemporary audience. With a growing demand for more diversity, inclusivity, and modernization in mainstream media, Disney is attempting to update its timeless tales while preserving the core elements that made them beloved by audiences for decades. But what happens when you update a story that's already so ingrained in our collective consciousness? Is it possible to modernize a classic tale without losing the magic and charm that made it iconic in the first place? In this case, the remake of Snow White represents more than just a new visual style or a retelling of an old narrative. It's part of Disney's larger attempt to reflect contemporary cultural values, but in doing so it raises questions about the essence of the original tale. But here's the main question. Is this transition going to hurt the OG Snow White fans? Will they accept there would be no hero to protect Snow White this time? Nevertheless, the drama of presenting modern Snow White doesn't end here. One of the most talked about aspects of the remake is the casting of Rachel Zegler as Snow White. Zegler, a Colombian-American actress who gained widespread recognition for her role in West Side Story, brings a fresh perspective to a character that has traditionally been associated with European whiteness. The casting choice, while seen as a positive step for representation, has also sparked significant debate. Is casting a Latina actress as Snow White a progressive choice? Or does it signal a more troubling trend of changing iconic characters to fit modern sensibilities? For many, Zegler's casting is a symbol of diversity and inclusivity, reflecting a broader push to move away from the Eurocentric standards of beauty and heroism that have historically dominated Hollywood. Snow White, after all, has always been a universal character, a symbol of purity, kindness, and goodness, all qualities that transcend any single race or ethnicity. In this light, having Zegler, who is of Colombian descent, embody the role of Snow White feels like a natural and exciting evolution of the character. However, there are others who argue that casting Zegler is an attempt to rewrite history and disconnect Snow White from her European roots. The original 1815 Brothers Grimm fairy tale, upon which the 1973 Disney animation was based, features a princess who is described as having skin as white as snow, a phrase that has historically been understood to reference both her literal complexion and her symbolic purity. By casting an actress who does not fit the traditional image of whiteness associated with the character, some critics feel that Disney is undermining the cultural and historical context of the original story. In this view, Snow White is not just a character but an embodiment of a specific cultural ideal, and altering her ethnicity could be seen as altering the essence of the character itself. The question at the heart of this debate is, does Snow White's ethnicity matter in the first place? For many people, the character of Snow White represents certain universal themes: youthful innocence, kindness, and an enduring belief in good triumphing over evil. These qualities are not defined by race or ethnicity, but rather by the character's actions and the values she embodies. From this perspective, casting a Latina actress in the role of Snow White is not about rewriting the character's essence, but about reflecting the multicultural world we live in today. On the other hand, some critics believe that the choice to cast Zegler in the role of Snow White is part of a broader trend of revising classic characters and stories in ways that obscure their historical context. To these critics, Snow White's fair skin is more than just an aesthetic choice. It's tied to the character's identity as a European princess, and by casting someone who doesn't match that image, Disney risks distorting the essence of the fairy tale. Modernizing the dwarfs. In Disney's upcoming Snow White live-action remake, the iconic seven dwarfs are not being portrayed as small, comical figures as they were in the original 1937 animated film. Instead, Disney has decided to reimagine these characters as a more diverse group of magical creatures with varying sizes, genders, and backgrounds. This creative decision is a part of Disney's larger trend of modernizing its classics to reflect more contemporary values of inclusivity, diversity, and progressive storytelling. However, this decision has led to considerable backlash. Critics argue that Disney's reimagining of the dwarfs is a departure from the essence of the original story. The dwarfs in the 1973 film are central to the charm of Snow White. They are quirky, funny, and provide support to Snow White in a way that highlights the value of friendship and loyalty. For many fans, the dwarfs are an integral part of the magic and appeal of the fairy tale. More importantly, advocates for people with dwarfism have expressed disappointment that Disney did not cast actors with dwarfism in these roles. Prominent actor Peter Dinklage, who is known for his advocacy for people with dwarfism, criticized the studio's decision, arguing that Disney missed an opportunity to cast actors who are actually living with dwarfism. Dinklage's concern stems from the belief that casting non-dwarfs in roles traditionally occupied by people with dwarfism further marginalizes that community and misses an opportunity for true representation. Dinklage and others argue that representation matters, especially when it comes to giving people with disabilities or distinct physical traits a chance to play roles that reflect their lived experiences. By casting non-dwarfs in these parts, Disney may inadvertently perpetuate a stereotype and exclude an entire group of talented actors who could have brought a unique perspective to the dwarfs. Oppositely, the Daily Wire's adaptation of Snow White seems to be sticking more closely to the traditional portrayal of the dwarfs as they were originally presented in the 1937 animated film. In this version, the seven dwarfs will likely remain small, human-like characters, each with a distinct personality. They will continue to serve as Snow White's loyal companions, just as they did in the original story. For the Daily Wire, this is about staying true to the grim fairy tale and the version of Snow White that has become iconic in popular culture. The dwarfs are seen as essential characters in the story's structure. They are not just comic relief, but also loyal friends who provide support and protection to Snow White. In this version, their personalities and their roles are paramount, and the focus will be on their connection to Snow White and their importance within the narrative. However, this approach might raise questions about how sensitive the portrayal of the dwarfs should be in today's cultural climate. While the Daily Wire's intention is to honor the original story and stay true to the traditional depiction of the dwarfs, it's important to ask, does maintaining this portrayal risk ignoring the cultural changes around the representation of people with dwarfism? This is where the tension lies. The Daily Wire is adhering to the old-fashioned depiction of the dwarfs, but the question of inclusivity still looms large. In a time when Hollywood is increasingly striving to be more inclusive and sensitive to marginalized groups, sticking too closely to traditional depictions of characters, particularly in ways that exclude or overlook the very real issues of representation, may alienate some audiences who feel that such portrayals are outdated or insensitive. This brings us to the next part of our exploration, the classic Snow White. If you've made it this far into the video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, share the video, and become a true hero of our community. Brett Cooper's traditional Snow White. While Disney's Snow White remake pushes boundaries with its diversity and progressive themes, the Daily Wire's Snow White and the Evil Queen promises to remain firmly rooted in the traditional elements of the fairy tale. Starring conservative YouTuber Brett Cooper, this version of Snow White is billed as a more faithful adaptation, emphasizing the classic narrative of Snow White as a beautiful and innocent princess who is ultimately saved by the prince. "I was raised on the original Grimm's fairy tales," Cooper said, "so I'm thrilled that we're bringing this iconic story to life for the next generation. Snow White is such a beautiful character, and I'm honored to be playing her." Cooper emphasized that the movie would focus on timeless values like love, friendship, and kindness, which she believes are at the heart of what makes fairy tales so enduring. The casting of Brett Cooper, a rising star known for her outspoken conservative views, positions Snow White and the Evil Queen as a counterpoint to Disney's reimagining. The Daily Wire's film is marketed as a rejection of the feminist, woke influence in Hollywood, offering a Snow White who embodies traditional femininity rather than modern ideals of female empowerment. The portrayal of the Evil Queen, too, will stay closer to the original, focusing on her vanity and jealousy as timeless flaws rather than attempting to humanize her as a tragic or misunderstood figure. For conservative audiences who feel that Hollywood has increasingly veered away from values they hold dear, Snow White and the Evil Queen represents a return to familiar moral lessons: beauty, purity, and the redemptive power of love. Can the Daily Wire's Snow White find success in a market dominated by Disney, or will it fail to resonate with mainstream audiences? The Daily Wire's approach raises important questions about the role of media in shaping societal values. By returning to the traditional Snow White and the Evil Queen rejects the notion that stories must be rewritten to reflect modern sensibilities. For the film's creators and its audience, the charm of the fairy tale lies in its simplicity and timeless appeal, not in trying to adapt it to fit the complexities of contemporary political and cultural issues. But in doing so, is the film overlooking the importance of evolving narratives that reflect diverse experiences and empower marginalized voices? A cultural divide. At the heart of the Snow White debate is the question of how far we should go in adapting classic fairy tales for modern sensibilities. Disney's Snow White, with its diverse cast and themes of empowerment, clearly reflects the desire to modernize. The Daily Wire's version, with its adherence to traditional gender roles and moral values, represents a desire to preserve what many view as the timeless charm of the original tale. But what happens when the cultural context of a fairy tale is shifted to reflect modern ideals? Is it still the same story, or does it become something else entirely? Does Snow White's innocence, beauty, and need for rescue matter more than her ability to lead, empower, and break free from traditional norms? Both adaptations of Snow White are a reflection of the cultural shifts taking place in Hollywood and in society at large. Disney's approach caters to a more progressive worldview that sees female empowerment as central to storytelling. In contrast, the Daily Wire's version appeals to audiences that long for a return to the moral simplicity and traditional values of classic fairy tales. The cultural divide between these two approaches has never been more pronounced. As the Snow White saga unfolds, we are forced to confront bigger questions about the role of storytelling in shaping our values. You can also add here when Rachel was talking about it's not about traditional Snow White anymore. Although we're in a new, progressive era, fans have voiced differing opinions about the two upcoming Snow Whites. Before we dive into the next section, which Snow White would you choose? Fan reactions, a divided audience. As both Disney and the Daily Wire prepare to unveil their respective Snow White adaptations, the fan reactions to each version have been strikingly divided. In the age of social media, where every casting decision, plot change, and creative choice is subject to intense scrutiny and public debate, it's no surprise that these two versions of Snow White have sparked passionate discussions across the cultural spectrum. Disney's live-action remake of Snow White has been met with significant backlash from certain segments of its audience, particularly from fans who feel that the changes to Snow White's character and the reimagining of the dwarfs go too far. For many, Disney's decision to modernize the story by focusing on themes like female empowerment, diversity, and the reworking of traditional roles has felt like a departure from the magic and charm of the original 1973 animated classic. On social media, critics have raised concerns that the new Snow White, portrayed by Rachel Zegler, strays too far from the character's traditional role as a passive princess who finds salvation through the actions of others, particularly the prince. While Disney's attempt to make Snow White a more active, empowered character has been applauded by some, others feel that this shift turns her into something almost unrecognizable. Some critics argue that by trying to make Snow White more modern and relevant to today's audience, Disney risks losing the very essence of the character, her innocence, kindness, and timeless appeal. These critics view Snow White as a symbol of purity and goodness, qualities that they believe are most clearly expressed when she remains true to her passive, more traditional role in the narrative. Moreover, Disney's decision to diversify the cast by casting Zegler as a Latina Snow White has sparked its own controversy. Some see it as a progressive step that makes the character more representative of the multicultural world we live in today. But for others, it feels like a deliberate rewriting of the original story and a departure from the European roots that the character was historically tied to. The casting choice has brought to the surface questions about race, cultural identity, and whether changing the ethnic background of a beloved character is a necessary evolution or a misguided attempt to please modern sensibilities. Additionally, Disney's reworking of the Seven Dwarfs into a more diverse and magical group of characters, moving away from the traditional comedic roles of the dwarfs as small, humorous figures, has sparked another round of heated debate. Fans of the original film argue that this change takes away from the whimsy and charm of the classic Snow White tale, with the dwarfs serving as loyal companions who are meant to embody specific archetypes and personalities. Critics worry that the new version of the dwarfs feels too far removed from the beloved characters of the original and too steeped in the studio's agenda to reflect diversity at all costs. Which movie do you think will dominate the box office and win over fans' hearts? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.